Welcome to Wildstorm Wednesday. Welcome to Gen 13. AKAPADers, subscribe, support, leave a comment. If you guys are into 90s comics, we do everything 90s comic books on this channel. Today is Wednesday. Wednesday we focus on Jim Lee's very own Wildstorm Productions. He later sells it to DC Comics. Why do we have Gen 13? Why do we have Wildcats action figures? What am I really doing? I'm going to try and put these in order. Are they in order? I've been running around Center City, Philadelphia with Gen 13, 5-issue miniseries, and 2 editions of the regular monthly. So Gen 13 was so powerful, so strong, so popular upon its initial release, which was this right here. It went monthly, and it goes monthly for a very long time. Oh, by the way, also had Ballistic here for Top Cow Tuesdays. We don't need that. So, what's been bugging me? See, Wildcats is the one that goes into Saturday morning cartoons, Playmate action figures, an SNES game. We have Spartan, Voodoo, Hellspawn here. The Demon Knight. The Demon Knights are the predominant villains within the Wildstorm universe at this time. Also, you guys know we have Pike, also from Wildcats, that hovers around the drawing table. So, when something like Wildcats fails as a Saturday morning cartoon, you think you're done. You think your company's over with. But it's not. Because we're in this creative boom of not only acquiring young talent that's flooding American comics, but they're also throwing enough SHIT against the wall to see what sticks. And one of those things that stuck is Gen 13. And mostly from J. Scott Campbell, this guy right here, J. Scott Campbell. You guys see his name. J. Scott Campbell draws women in a particular way. And we have to get to this sideways spread page, which is when Fairchild here, she hulks out, rips out of her clothing, and we get this. And from this point on, Gen 13, it's pretty much an adolescent comic book created by adolescents. It's the biggest comic book of its type to reach the biggest audience. From this point moving forward, we had, teenage books by teenagers, but nothing as impactful and meaningful as Gen 13. So I've been reading the 5-issue miniseries. And here's the wild thing. So when I read the monthly, I didn't realize this. Isn't this amazing? The monthly ends, right? It's 29 pages, but it's a one and done comic. Isn't that amazing? Like no storyline launch or anything. It's just yet another Gen 13 adventure. Gen 13 issue 4, which people forget features Pit. See, people always say issue 3 is the Pit issue. And you're like, no, if you actually read it, 3 and 4 is the Pit issue. Pit opens up. I don't know. Tracking the growth of J. Scott Campbell is one of the subjects of this video. But he really, his growth is jaw-dropping. But getting back to Pit, we see Pit here. See, Pit is well in Gen 13 issue 4. Around this time, Wetworks finally comes out. We did Wetworks a week ago on Wildstorm Wednesday. But what I want to get at is this spread here. See, Lynch reveals to everyone, and he gives us some insight and some detail into Team 7. And Team 7 splinters off and becomes a franchise of its own within the context of Wildstorm. But this is where people really became aware that Wildstorm had a back history, so much so that those characters were in full effect monthly. So if you have something like the failure of Wildcats, and you're lucky enough to get a Gen 13, you want to keep it going for as long as possible. I want to discuss the downfall of this book. But first, let's go through some of the different ways you can appreciate the issue 1 of this series. All right. And here we go. Some black and whites. Very common on this channel, Wildstorm Archives Genesis #1 collection. Let's just show it off. We get it's all right here. Gen 13, issue 1, volume 1. Everything right down to the chest bursting scene here. Glorious black and white. Gen 13 archives. Thick boy here. Fluctuates in value, can be in the hundreds or could be in the 30s. We have a complete, amazing collection here of the 5-issue miniseries going into the monthly, including some of the Jim Lee issues. So we get some, Jim Lee comes on board later and tries to draw Gen 13, and in my view fails miserably. He gets his butt handed to his young protege, J. Scott Campbell. But Gen 13 pretty much becomes like a TNA type book, thanks to J. Scott Campbell's ability to render the babes. Now, some of you might have this. Ash Kang Gen 13. This is not a Gen 13 Ash. This is, we can see, coming home, big deal. We got 2 stories in here. One is a Gen 13 story, but the other one is not a Gen 13 story, which would be this one right here. Well, actually, I'm sorry, it is. This is a Travis Charest Lynch story. But this is mostly the Jim Lee drawn issue. Now, we do get some J. Scott. But there is a Gen 13 Ash Kang that's all J. Scott. That's not this one. Gen 13 popular enough, it gets even like a spin-off book. DV8. People forget how these two are linked. These are the bad teenagers. These are the good teenagers. Gen 13 popular enough to have its own spin-off from very early on. Now, previously, we profiled where the Gen 13 font and logo came from, which came from this book here, 13th Gen. We discussed the original solicitation of Gen 13, which was Gen X. Right here, Gen X. Jim Lee later gets a cease and desist from Marvel, because Marvel's laying it down. And let's see, can we even track it down in this issue of Diamond Previews? Right here, let's see. This is the image section. Wildcats issue 5. We have Deathmate. Let's find it. And there it is. Gen 13 solicited, or Gen X, solicited around, look, the Cyber Force trade paperback, Images of Shadowhawk, Stormwatch 5, Dragon 4, Prophet, Super Patriot, Union, Team Youngblood, Trencher, Youngblood 5. So roughly 5 months in, right, they stumble upon Gen 13. And it later eclipses everything from the Wildstorm universe. Gen 13 is so hyped that I love this edition. I think this is called the Rave edition. So this was to emulate just like a Zin at the time. We have interviews here with Jim Lee, J. Scott Campbell. This is, and Brandon Cho, who is, like, we don't get many interviews with him. Alice Garner, who later becomes a fantastic painter, but he's the inker. J. Scott Campbell becomes idolized with this, and we can see they do a great job in getting the word out. Like Lynch, Rainmaker, like all these separate characters, right? But then we have the movie. So Gen 13 gets his animation treatment. We've done videos on this, aka Padders. This is setting up the thread we're doing here of Gen 13 and Wildstorm Wednesday. But J. Scott Campbell here really becomes an idol of the industry, drawing all the cool stuff. And there's a little bit of a cult of personality that comes up around J. Scott just because he's young and he has this like feverish, like Disney-esque, 90s-esque style. The intersection of J. Scott's style and his quick evolution, it's something we really haven't seen before. It's everything that Rob Liefeld was hoping to get out of Stephen Platt, and he never really quite did. So where does Gen 13 kind of go south? Because the book needs to live on post J. Scott. So let me just grab a stack here. We're going to grab a Thick Boys stack. Right here. This is a nice stacky stack of Gen 13. This is fresh from my Wildstorm comic box. So I got duplicates of some of it. So these are miniseries. Issue 2. Wow, I didn't realize I had that many. Issue 5 miniseries. And then boom, we're smack into the monthly. Now, when Gen 13 drops monthly, they have 13 different covers, which are all profiled right here. They even invent the sketch cover. I want to say Wildstorm Productions invented the blank sketch cover. And then quickly from, the one and done, because I guess they knew. See, the reason why we're one and done here, let's just remind ourselves right here, one and done, there's Lynch, is because issue 2, we're in the smack middle of a company-wide crossover. And guess what? You have to do the company-wide crossover. But J. Scott, they let J. Scott work in, drawings of Babes, which is here, where Rainmaker makes a pass on to Freefall, and Freefall's not having it. Freefall's just like, just rub me down. But, I'm not into you. Even though they're both like jaw dropped at Fairchild here coming out of the pool. Right? I mean, guys, this is just like kind of like a TNA book. Right? TNA. Okay, so issue 3 is... this is the prototype of everything that, in my view, would become Danger Girl. So J. Scott's already toying with this like idea of female adventurers. So, we get his like Indiana Jones issue. We get the characters getting more cranked up, more sexualized. But he's becoming a little bit quicker. He's losing some of what we like to call the J. Scott mouth. See, like kind of like a bumbling Bruce Campbell type figure to be the sidekick for the girls. Again, issues 3 and 4, the clear prototype for Danger Girl. So this is J. Scott Campbell doing his version of Jim Lee's Rogue Savage Land for X-Men. And like this is just like Battle of the Amazons. And we get all of this. Just like really cool stuff. J. Scott, every single issue. More characters. He is so good. He draws distinctive faces. Good design sense. Good illustration. Good backgrounds. We can see that he gets a lot done on time. Even when he comes in. Like issue 21. 21 pages here. A little bit short of the story count. But Wildstorm during this time was really big on backup stories. Which... in reflection, Wildstorm should have been using the space that they've had for backup stories to sell advertising. So, we're 5 months in, we're 6 months in, and then we get Jim Lee. So Jim Lee is like, hey, I'm not going to draw Wildcats. I want to draw Gen 13. So instead of having like 2 top tier books with 2 top tier artists, you jump on the bandwagon of Gen 13 and you try and draw. Here he draws like 2 issues. This is now the introduction of DB8. which later had like a really big launch. And we kind of want to say, on a artistry level, on an illustration level, Jim Lee does not quite land in drawing Gen 13. This is one of his Wildstorm failures. So issue 8, we're back with J. Scott Campbell. This is one of the covers. I never liked this cover. I don't know why. It's like the texture in the background and like the new logo. The logo is just But yeah, J. Scott comes in, rocking and rolling, doing the J. Scott stuff. But we kind of see there's a little bit of a slowdown. We're not really too good with backgrounds. The fight choreography is not there. It's great that we got the deviants here. But yeah, we're still connecting this to other sales, which is great. Issue 9. Well, issue 9 by J. Scott is drawn by Roberto Ramos, who later draws a Gen 13 spinoff called Gen 13 Unreal World. Roberto is also the artist of the DV8s. So they solidify the next artist for the next big release, which is fair. So let's just remind ourselves. If I can find the books sometimes once I'm done with them. Right here. See, Roberto Ramos. So Wildstorm does a great job in setting this book up. They spend almost a half a year with these characters in other books. And they get like Warren Ellis to come on. And this had like it was an 8-issue box set. At the time of the Gen 13 monthly, they had a 13-issue box set. Comic book box sets. Fantastic idea. Just really cool high-end stuff for the time. Gen 13 gets stuck up in yet another company-wide crossover. Fire from Heaven, which includes the death of Deathblow. Issue 9, another company-wide crossover. Like, you can kind of see, potentially, like, we're double dipping, but we get to see J. Scott draw the Wildstorm universe. And it is, like Fairchild, like, reunites with her long-lost father, who we thought was dead from Gen 13 Volume 1, Issue 1. Yeah, but look, J. Scott's drawing Grifter. He's drawing Malcolm, the new leader of Stormwatch. And it's cool stuff. Yeah, like, it's there. It's there. Issue 12. Issue 12 always was a standout because J. Scott comes with form. Like, it's almost like he comes full circle. And we have some, like, fantastic textures here for the whales. He needs some help with some of these other pages. But J. Scott really kind of comes in with Alex Garner. And it's not a full issue, but what he does is noticeable. I think it is. And we see this, again, another prototype for things that we would later see in Danger Girl. And then Gen 13, issue 13, A, B, and C. It's just this legendary independent crossover here. We have Gen 13 crossing over with Archie. And so much of this is Grunge's, like, fantasy. He basically gets, like, knocked on the head. And while he's, like, dreaming away, he hangs out with Bone, the Turtles, Wolverine, look, Spawn, Madman, Jim Lee. He draws Jim Lee. So it's like, right, look, he does crack on. This goes to show you how little respect Rob Liefeld has. Look, they just make fun of Rob Liefeld here. Black Frag right here. So Gen 13, A, B, and C. Here, he even draws Tony Robbins, which I love. But yeah, and let me see. Yep, we draw Wolverine. We gotta have Wolverine in there. We also gotta have Tony Robbins. So, oh yeah, and the Max. I mean, it's endless. So from there, but here's the cool thing. We have a Marvel ad. So around this time, AKA Padders, look, another Marvel ad. What we're doing here is Jim Lee is sleeping. He has a apartment in New York City. He's living in there with his wife. And Heroes Reborn is kicking up and rolling in, and Jim Lee is in position to take everything he has with Wildstorm and merge it with Marvel Comics and move the Marvel comic book offices from the West Coast to the East Coast. And that doesn't quite happen. And there's reasons I've done videos on that. So Gen 13, 14, right? We get some of that booty. We get no Jay Scott though. But, like flipping through this, right? We tricked you. You thought that booty was Jay Scott. But this is a very Jay Scott looking issue. Like even this face, very Jay Scott. So this guy's going to come along. His name's Al Rio. Al Rio is able to nail the Jay Scott style. So Luke Ross right here. That's our artist. So here we got. We just pile it on sometimes. This one's gonna be tough to go back and forth on. So Gen 13, 15, Luke Ross. Gen 13, 16, Jay Scott comes back. So Jay Scott took a 2-month sabbatical, right? Everyone needs to rest their drawing hand. Not much of a Gen 13 adventure, not much of the visuals that we like. But yeah, you would buy the next issue hoping it comes back to form. And we bring back, right, the villain from Armadillo from Gen 13 issue 2. 17. All right, we get the S&M stuff. I believe there was a Gen 13 cover for this that included the S&M girls, which are like the Gen 13 girls. And I think that was also released as a poster or lithograph. But this is what I like to call the fetish issue. But also themes that echo within American culture. Like a lot of times, like reading Gen 13 you were almost like reading MTV. J. Scott Campbell issue 18. J. Scott Campbell. Ooh, who draws 19? We don't have credits. This looks like J. Scott. Here we go. It looks like J. Scott, but we have, J. Scott Campbell and Al Rio as pencils. So Al Rio, like Al Rio face. Al Rio faces here. This is, that one looks a little J. Scott, but the men are clearly J. Scott, or clearly Al Rio, and the girls are potentially all J. Scott. We don't know what the division of duties and labor was, but we see less J. Scott in 19. So issue 20, okay, we're back to J. Scott, but we have Al Rio here. So Al Rio. So if you see what they're doing, we're training Al Rio. Like this is Al Rio. This is Al Rio. Al Rio. Al Rio. And R.I.P. Al Rio too. He's no longer with us. Rio. We're not done yet, AKAPAD, because you're about to see a swerve that when I realize this, I'm still not done talking about it. Let's get the next stack, because we got a lot of Gen 13 here. So we're not going to go through all these. So issue 23, right? Al Rio gets full billing here. The future belongs to Gen 13. Issue 24, J. Scott cover, but we get... It's confusing sometimes when Wildstorm puts the credits at the end, but we can tell just by looking through this. There is no J. Scott at all outside the cover. So let's get to issue 25. The third company-wide crossover, Wildstorm New Horizons. This is where the company breaks, actually. 25th anniversary issue. Look, we have a Chavis Charest. He did these interconnecting covers at the time. The second set of interconnecting Wildstorm covers. Brandon Chow, Al Rio, blah, 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 blah. A bunch of other people. And something just feels off, right? Like the coloring, the inking, like all of these elements are not quite there. But then we get this. Oh. So... let's just say all of this for Wildstorm, the most disappointing sales numbers from what they've had with the original launch of the series and the failed animated movie, because that never got released. Disney bought the animated movie and basically nearly bankrupted Jim Lee personally. Sales suck. So what do? You have to pivot. As a publisher, you have to pivot. So they pivot into, J. Arcuda, Gary Frank pencils. And Gary Frank is like a face guy. He draws like great faces during this time. Issue 26, Joe Mad cover. That's who you really wanted. But now we're into the Gary Frank era of Gen 13. Gary Frank. And look, like, what are we doing? Gary Frank. Frank. Issue 38. I don't know. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Gary Frank cover. That looks like Gary Frank. Gary Frank 42. Kevin McGuire, who people compared Gary Frank to, by the way. Kevin McGuire comes in, also known for his faces. And that's the fall. That's how we lost cabin pressure with Gen 13. I want to end it with this. The last time J. Scott Campbell draws Gen 13 is the Wildstorm celebrating 25 years hardcover, where we get also the last time Jim Lee working on Deathblow here. They say this is the wrap up of the story from Darker Image. It's actually not. But here we go. Gen 13. Within the protest for women's rights, we have third wave feminism here. And J. Scott Campbell draws 1, 2, 3 pages of Gen 13. And the wild thing is that J. Scott really doesn't go back to sequential storytelling either. So there it is, the rise and fall of Gen 13.